Now, I am an emergency physician, so I do have that ADHD thing going on, so I can't be confined to the stage. They can't hold me in one place. So I will roam around a little bit. I may sit down at a table, take a sip of iced tea or Starbucks that's out there. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about emotional intelligence. And I tell you, if you haven't been outside yet today, it is really nice outside. It's beautiful, Fort Lauderdale, sun, fun, the beach, pool, spa. And we're talking about EQ. And so often the first question I get is, what is EQ? What is emotional intelligence? And why does this matter? Why do we need to talk about this? So our goal here is very simple. To be the boss that we would want to have. And we'll do a simple show of hands poll in a few minutes, which I think is going to illustrate a very important point. So our specific objectives to meet our goal, number one, we're going to define what emotional intelligence is. So first poll, show of hands. Who here has ever heard of EI or EQ? Good. So most of the room. It's something that's really taken off in the last decade or so. There's tons and tons that's out in the business literature. I have no affiliations with any company whatsoever. Harvard Business Review, some of these other reviews that a lot of MBA students, MBA schools, and business leaders read. This is something that they've been talking about, a buzz, for the last decade and a half. And I can tell you that in my personal trajectory, I'd never heard of the term until a couple of years ago. But when I heard about it and learned what it was and what impact it has on leaders and leadership, I'm like, this is an incredibly important thing. And this would be an important thing for all of us to take into what we do on a daily basis. So we're going to talk specifically about identifying strategies to sharpen and refine emotional intelligence. And most importantly, talk about some of the pitfalls of leading with low EQ. So our roadmap, how we're going to meet our goals and objectives. We're going to start with why it is that this topic's so important. We're going to define EQ, provide sort of a conceptual framework, and then launch into the pearls and pitfalls, where the rubber meets the road. Like, how can we actually take this abstract concept, emotional intelligence, EI, EQ, and incorporate it into our repertoire to make our programs, our offices, our departments stronger and better and more cohesive? So this is something that hits my inbox on a frequent basis. I can tell you this is something that just hit my inbox not too long ago. Unleash your emotional intelligence for a leadership advantage. Tons of books that are out there. We're going to talk about some of those books. We'll provide some references. There are some references that are in your handouts. If you become as passionate about this topic as I have after reading about it, it is fascinating to read and to learn about all the business leaders, Fortune 500 companies. This is really a significant area of focus for executive coaching in other areas. As I said before, beautiful weather outside, but I hope to share over the next 45 minutes my passion for this topic and hopefully inspire some passion in all of us here to read further about it. So why is it that we're here? And I can tell you just by virtue of sitting in this room, you're a leader. Everyone in this room is a leader. And importantly, leadership is all around us. It all started in grade school. We had coaches. If you were involved with any type of teams, perhaps your grade school gym teacher. I remember my gym teacher vividly. He was a leader. We all looked up to him. We were never able to keep him happy, no matter what we did. It took me a while to learn how to do a somersault. It was a major point of contention. So we've worked with coaches. We've worked with managers in the workplace. We've worked with deans and chairs, hospital administrators. But most importantly, as I mentioned, everyone here is a leader. So let's take that second non-scientific poll. Who here has ever worked with a boss who just doesn't seem to get it? And I can tell you, if you're not raising your hand, I'm absolutely shocked. I raise double hands, but what always concerns me the most is I'm very pleased to have a few folks from my orb and team, past and present, and they always raise their hands as well, which is a little disconcerting when I ask that question. So the punchline is that we've all worked at some point with someone who just doesn't seem to get it. And we look at some of the decisions that they make, some of those fiery emails that go out, some of the things that they say that really just pisses people off. And you wonder, like, why did that happen? Did it have to go down this way? So what is it that makes a good leader? Let's look at the flip side. We've all had non-effective leaders or exposure to them in some capacity. What is it that makes a really strong, effective leader? There's a lot of foundational skills. You gotta have the intellect for it. You gotta have the technical ability. If you're in GME, you gotta understand how GME works. You gotta understand PLAs. You gotta understand accreditation. You gotta understand onboarding of residents, maintaining all the licensure and certifications that are necessary. You gotta deal with ABEM. There's a lot of technical skill that goes into it. But it's not necessarily being the best at generating PLAs and dealing with ABEM most effectively and making sure all the check boxes are hit during the web ads update process that makes a good leader. So what are those other ingredients? So hold that thought for a second, and we're going to take a step back. That step back is going to be two general principles that apply to leadership, but apply to a number of different areas. The first principle, the power of marginal factors. And I put in here the JVD principle. Now, JVD is John V. DeSimone, senior physician in our group, been working there for years, has been in the trenches, has seen it all. Like, he started emergency medicine before emergency medicine was emergency medicine. And he always has great musings on things. And one of the many hats that he's worn over the years is being the sideline NFL doc for the Washington Redskins. Now, my beloved Washington Redskins, it's been a rough 2 decades for me. But I learned a lot from JVD, his sideline work, and he got to meet all the players, and I've had deep conversations with JVD over the years. And one time I said to him, the Redskins just never seem to do well. And I said, what is it that distinguishes a great team from the rest of the pack? And JVD's principle is that it's usually only a couple of plays per game. Everyone's a good player. There's no one in the NFL that doesn't have the technical ability and the aptitude for football or the physical capabilities to reach and make those incredible plays. But usually the winning teams, they figure out a way, week after week, all season long, to make those few plays that make a difference. It's a marginal factor. Keep that in mind. The second one is that success is not always exponential. We've had great medical students. We meet them on interview day. Everyone loves them. We talk about them at the round table. This is the best person to ever come to our program. If we can only land him or her. They come to the program. All of a sudden, 6 months down the road, you get some feedback from the faculty. You get some feedback from the program office. This person doesn't seem like a great team player, and maybe the medical school really wasn't telling us something here. Because what looked good on paper and what looked good in that 8-hour interview day is not necessarily panning out here. The point is that success is not always linear or exponential. Sometimes these great students don't turn out to be great residents. Sometimes these great residents don't turn out to be great attendings. Sometimes these great teachers and educators within our programs, when they get appointed program director or APD or clerkship director, turn out to be not great at that leadership role. So an important thing to keep in mind, marginal factors, profound impact. You look at the first place, as much as it pains me to say it, the first place Patriots versus the last place Jets, a couple of plays a game. That's the difference between the top and the bottom of the pack. Predicting future success, not exponential, not linear, and it can actually have a negative slope. The Starling curve. We talk about this all the time in heart failure, where if the heart is provided so much of a good thing in terms of preload and blood, at some point it breaks down and can't function optimally anymore. So things really fall off the curve. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, I can relay several stories where this has occurred, where we've had people that we thought who are going to really excel at the next level, but when they hit that next level in terms of leadership, responsibility, they just didn't pan out the way that everyone anticipated that they would. So the examples from industry, the top prospects don't always pan out. Again, example, Washington Redskins. Anyone here ever heard of RG3? Heisman Trophy winner, the greatest thing since sliced bread. We were jumping from the rafters in Washington, D.C. when we heard that he was coming to join the Washington Redskins. Didn't pan out too well. Stayed with us, was injured, never really made it anywhere. On the flip side, there's a little-known guy in Boston by the name of Tom Brady. He wasn't in the first round of the NFL draft. He wasn't in the second. He was actually in the 6th round of the 2000 NFL draft as the 199th pick. That organization got quite lucky. He didn't fall off the Starling curve. He actually took it exponentially. So in any industry and in any domain, marginal factors, major impact, what distinguishes, and also it's hard to predict success in the next phase. So if there are things that we can do as leaders, and we've all determined that we are all leaders within our programs, to pave that path for success and find those marginal factors, it basically tees us up for good things. So a marginal factor that is hugely important from the business literature, and when they do surveys of companies and CEOs and Fortune 500 companies, there's actually a whole body of literature that's out there in business schools and in the business realm about what makes a successful CEO. What characteristics? What is it that makes somebody able to carry a Fortune 500 or smaller company forward in a very effective manner, where they hit their profit margins, they are innovative, they do all these great things. The one thing that the studies have showed us everyone can hang their hat on, it's dealing with people. The CEOs that are great at leading teams lead to a healthier workforce, which gets the job done in a highly efficient and effective manner. So that's where EQ comes in. Emotional intelligence is that special ingredient. It's not the only one, but it's one of the important ones. How you interact with and deal with people, and your own barometer and your own internal set point of how you respond to the various stressors that are all around us. So we'll talk about defining a framework. What is emotional intelligence? This was a very esoteric term to me and concept, but it's really quite simple. It is the skills that enable the best leaders to maximize their own performance and also to maximize the performance of others in the performance of a team as a whole. Now, unlike IQ, where there's a relative set point, and I say that with these examples, I will never have the intellect of Albert Einstein or the creative ability of Steve Jobs. I could read every textbook in the world. They have natural gifts for innovation and thinking of novel ways of doing things and other talents and gifts that just not in my wheelhouse. But everyone here sitting in this room has the aptitude, you have the skill set to be effective at GME. That's what we do day in and day out. But this whole other frame here, the emotional intelligence component or quotient, there's an innate baseline. But fortunately, this is something, marginal factor, can be hugely important, that we can actually adapt, evolve, and grow over time. So if there's something that can make the difference, those few plays a game, those few decisions, those few emails that you self-embargo, that can make the difference and make it a healthier team, pretty powerful stuff. So, how do you refine EQ? We'll talk about this a lot, and we'll give specific examples. Persistence, patience, and feedback. Feedback, very, very tough thing. You have to have insight and the ability to listen to what others are saying. That's point number one. Ask for feedback and ask for genuine feedback. Because without it, it's impossible to refine your EQ skill set. And embrace it. And it's not always flowery. I can tell you the first thing I do when I get these reports and these metrics and these ongoing professional practice evaluations, which provides nursing feedback and feedback from patients and feedback from residents and feedback from students and feedback from supervisors, that was one of the hardest adjustments for me as an attending. I trained in an era 15, 18 years ago where you just got a pat on the head, keep on doing a good job. And if there was a problem, you got sent into a back room somewhere and there was an issue and you kind of hashed it out and then you were sent back to just do a good job again. The amount of spokes coming into our center wheel for our residents, for our programs, is astronomical now. And if we are not preparing our residents for the spokes that they're going to experience as an attending, we're not doing a great job. Because I like to tell our residents all the time that this is a relative cocoon now compared to when you're an attending. Things are essentially a lot smoother, kinder, gentler in this protected environment than they will be in your first and your subsequent jobs. So let's talk about that foundational EQ skill set, and then we'll put the rubber meeting the road in terms of how we can incorporate these skills into practice. So it involves self-management skills and then managing relationships with others. Self-management, being aware, understanding yourself. Understanding what kind of drives you and the things that really can piss you off at times. That's an important thing to know because everyone has triggers. And we'll talk about some of those triggers specifically in emergency medicine and in residency training within emergency medicine. The key point, humility, modesty, always win the day. Embrace self-deprecation. When they do studies of CEOs, the best CEOs, the ones that have the most support and buy-in from the team, are not the ones that sit at meetings and be like, no, I didn't mean to say it that way. I'm always right. They're the ones that say, great point. Thank you for bringing that up. That is an exceptional point. And you know something? You are 100% correct, and I was just off the mark with this one. Embrace that humility. Self-regulation, being steady in approach and thinking prior to action. And I think there's a good example of this, and hopefully the PC audio wire is on here.
So you guys grew up together?
Yeah, since 3rd grade.
Sorry, the volume is low.
What are you looking at? We're not good enough for you. You look for something else? I don't know. What are you, big supermodels?
I will start it again. But if anyone's seen this commercial before, it's a great example.
Gloves? What are you doing? The girl's totally into me, Brad. Eat a Snickers. Why? Because you get a little angry when you're hungry. Better? Better. So, ladies, so losers.
Stacy, relax.
So, Joe Pesci in this commercial, not an example of self-regulation. The guy's hungry, he needs a Snickers bar, not acting like a cool cat, right? Not high EQ that he was operating with. So self-management motivation, this is something that's very important because we've all worked with folks at some point who are not as much in it for the passion of the work as they are for the fortune and glory. They want to achieve a certain level, a certain title, not necessarily for the love of the work, but because they just want the title. Very, very important thing in an EQ world, achieving for the sake of achievements alone. And that is beyond fortune and glory. That's an energy and a passion for the work, and that's optimism in the face of defeat. A very important foundational characteristics. And I like to look at it as the 2 steps back, 3 steps forward approach. My wife printed this up, and she has it in both of our kids' bedrooms. It is famous failures. And when you look at what these folks on this chart have achieved and where they started, you look at Michael Jordan after being cut from his high school basketball team. He went home, locked himself in his room, and cried. You look at the Beatles, who were told that they could never have a future in music. 2 steps back, motivated to take 3 steps forward. So that's our self-management skills. And we're going to talk about putting these into actions with specific examples, but this is just giving the framework. Now let's talk about managing those relationships with others. Empathy, considering what others will think. An important thing to do. I try to do this, and I'm a student of EQ. I will not tell you that I'm an expert. I try to do this with every email I craft. I take a moment, and I pause, I rest, I digest, and I say to myself, how would I feel if I received this correspondence? And I change about 100% of my emails that I draft initially. Because if we're in that knocking off checkboxes, trying to get through the day as efficiently and effectively as possible, we're going to miss out on great opportunities to do things better. So being transparent, equitable, consistent in approach, that always wins the day in terms of understanding others' feelings. Now, these social skills, this is really like leading change. Having the ability in developing the rapport with the team to move a team in a desired direction. And I said this earlier today, and I'll say it again now, the one constant that we can count on in GME in 2017 moving forward is change. Program requirements are not going to look the same. Our programs are not going to look the same. Everything in healthcare is changing at rapid speed. And so this is an important thing. Building that rapport, building that trust, gaining buy-in from your teams. Ultimately, a marathon and not a sprint. So the essential elements of emotional intelligence involve the self-management skills on the left and also the managing a relationship with others, being aware, regulating oneself, motivated moving forward, and utilizing that foundational skill set internally to maximize performance of others. So where does the rubber meet the road? Now let's talk about specifically emotional intelligence and ED leadership and what this means. Because when I first learned about this, I'm like, yeah, that's great. This is like theoretical construct, but how do I actually apply this to what I do on a daily basis? So I'm a big fan of top 10 lists. So I created a top 10 list of emotional intelligence in the emergency medicine workplace, pearls and pitfalls. And as I said before, I am certainly not an expert. I am a student, and this list is largely formulated on all of the mistakes that I have made and continue to make on a regular basis. But getting that feedback, super important to the process. So lesson number 1, support those whom you empower. Now I can tell you as a practicing clinician, the worst possible scenario is when my clinical chief comes and talks to me about a case and really doesn't support what I did on the field if it was reasonable decision-wise. And they say, you know something, even though what you did was reasonable, I need to back orthopedics on this, so I'm going to kind of throw you under the bus. How does that make me feel as a clinician working my hardest in the trenches? Now let's look at another example specifically from GME. Let's look at our chief residents. We have chief residents who are in a role, appointed leadership role within our programs. Oftentimes, other residents who aren't chiefs will ask the chief something and not get the response that they desire. And then they will march up the chain and go to the APDs or the PD or the program coordinators or the program management team and see if they can get an answer that's different and desired from someone else. Every time we say yes, when another decision of no has already been made, we are undermining those whom we've empowered. Important thing to keep in mind. And when you ask chief residents, and again, no study to demonstrate this, but off the cuff, asking them what drives them the most crazy, this is it. You are putting me in a position where I'm owning the schedule, and I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to work my hardest and craft the schedule and do it in a fair, equitable, and transparent way. And whenever an issue comes up and a resident's unhappy with that schedule, they come to you and you overturn what I have done. How does that help my ability to actually gain buy-in from my team? I'm doing my best. And if there's some feedback for the chiefs, that's great. Provide them with the feedback. But the point is that you always want to support those whom you've empowered. Now, I put one caveat here, because there's issues of law and there's issues of fact. And I'm married to an attorney, so I kind of bust out these terms. So what are the issues of law? This is the time where you may have to overturn something that has been enacted by someone that you've placed in a position of power. And a perfect example is let's say the chiefs make a decision, but that decision just so happens to be completely inconsistent with all of the written policies and procedures that you have. You have no choice but to rely on your policies and procedures. That is an issue of law. And in order to have a fair, equitable, and transparent system, you always have to uphold policies. And if you're finding that if you're having to make exceptions to policies more often than upholding the policies, you need to change the policy altogether. But that's very different from issues of fact. And I can tell you in my personal experience, no literature behind it, but 90% of what we deal with are issues of fact. He said, she said, they said, we said. It's a gray zone somewhere in between. That's where I always back off and say, you know something? I'm going to let the decision on the field stand. And unless there's been an issue of law that's been violated, you can show me how the policy has not been upheld. It's going to stay. We've empowered our chiefs. We trust the decisions that we make. We've entrusted them with this power and authority in a very prudent way, and we're going to stand behind them. Hugely, hugely important in any leadership post. Lesson number 2, embrace the difficult conversation. I hate difficult conversations. You know, I didn't go into medicine to argue with people all the time. You know, it's kind of like when we have a patient that's not getting the care that they desired, like, oh, it's always like, well, maybe we can just get the rheumatology consult down here in the middle of the night. Probably not, right? No one wants to have the difficult conversation, but I will say from a leadership perspective, perhaps the most important thing that we can do is embrace that difficult conversation. They're hard to have, but the whole circuit is better for it. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. A good friend of mine is a family practitioner. She really is an emergency physician at heart, though, but chose family practice, realized after her residency that the emergency department is where her heart is, works at a family practice department at an academic medical center, had the idea, one thing that she noticed in working there for 5 or 7 years is that all of her colleagues who were family practitioners, it drove them crazy when they had unscheduled care came to the family practice clinic. The patients who they knew, who were in their cohort that had fever or some acute issue that needed care by the clinic team, it would just totally mess up the schedule, and they didn't have time to fit it in, and they didn't want to tell those patients necessarily if they didn't need emergency care to go to the emergency department, long wait times, etc. So they would always try to find a way to work them into the schedule, but no one was happy with it. And she said, you know, I'm just looking at this. Maybe there's a way I can make this system better. I like urgent care. I like acute things. Let me approach my chair in family medicine, and I got a great idea. I will be the urgent care person in our clinic. Whenever there's an unscheduled visit, the rest of my team, they don't have to worry about it trying to crowbar that patient or their family into the schedule. They can just come see me. Win-win. Faculty will be happy. I'll be happy. We all work together as a team. We have to avoid sending people out when we don't need to. Sometimes patients are sick enough they need to go to the emergency department and some desire to go there. That's completely fine, but this will be a win-win. She actually went to her chair and had this conversation. The chair, true story, said, that's a fantastic idea. Let me get back to you. The next thing she hears, 3 weeks later, one of her colleagues had been promoted to director of urgent care for the family practice clinic. True story. Now, what would you expect that individual to do in that scenario? You got a couple of options, right? You can go talk to the chair. But at the end of the day, the trust that's so important in a working relationship was just completely undermined. She left the organization. And I had a talk with her, a good friend of mine from medical school. And I said, you know, what could that chair, your chair, have done differently for a different outcome? And she said something, this was several years ago, but it's always stuck with me. She goes, you know, if my chair would have sat me down a couple weeks later, as promised, and said, you know, you have a fantastic idea, but you're not the right person for that job because of X, Y, and Z. She goes, I would have been upset. She's like, but I wouldn't have left. Because it would have been transparent, open, and honest, and it would have respected the fact that I made myself vulnerable by making this recommendation, this suggestion. She's like, the fact that he never had a conversation with me, I just don't trust this system anymore, and I can't work here. So I think it brings up a very, very important point that intersects into all of our worlds all the time. It is goodwill versus bad faith. Goodwill is when, even if a decision is not in one's favor, most will appreciate and respect the fact that they had a conversation. Difficult conversation. But bad faith is that lack of a conversation at all, which is the short-term gain. Feels better, I have to avoid that difficult conversation, leads to deeper wounds that are oftentimes hard to heal. And I will be the first to admit, I do not like hard conversations. But importantly, you have to learn how to embrace those conversations, because at the end of the day, you're looking for goodwill to promote a team. Lesson number 3, place yourself in other shoes often. As mentioned before, whenever you're about to send an email, think before hitting send. How would I react to this same email? What's the tone? And we'll talk about e-communications in much greater detail, because e-communications are a big area of treachery, but it's important to think about that. Now, e-communications specifically. The intent does not equal the interpretation. Whether it's emails in all caps or a bunch of exclamation points or text messages or even better yet, tweets. The power of in-person. I think in our digital world, the pendulum has swung so far to hitting the boxes, checking the check boxes, moving through our day. We rarely pick up the phone. We rarely drop by someone's office these days to actually have an in-person conversation. And I'll be the first to tell you, I have been on a chairlift at a ski resort and gotten that email. Then I'm like, no. That's not going to happen. We can't do this. We covered this 2 years ago. Embargo yourself. Don't reply. Remember that there is no email, or very few, I should say, that require a response in 2 minutes. What I do a lot of times with those emails that really just, I can feel the pit in my stomach. When I'm reaching for the Zantac when I get an email, my first response is I'm going to sleep on it. I can take myself some Pepto-Bismol and I'm going to sleep on it overnight. And I'll reply tomorrow. And I can tell you the reply that I come up with the next day is often vastly different than my initial impulse. Very, very important point. E-communications continued, the CC button. If you want to really piss off someone that you work with, send them an email and CC their boss. It might make you feel better, but at the end of the day, the recipient of that email is not going to be too happy. Even worse is the blind CC. I hate blind CCs. I have seen so many issues occur with blind CCs where someone then replies to everyone and doesn't realize that someone was blind CC'd. Had this happen at work recently where there was a blind CC and the person replied all, and it was not a good situation. There was a lot of information shared that led to some pretty deep wounds and ultimately healed, but it didn't have to be that way. You're going to send an email to someone and you want to forward it to someone else, forward the email afterwards. Be careful with the CC. What we do and we try to do with our team, we try to include everyone. That shared consciousness mentality. You know, at the end of the day, the better we're communicating and the better the right hand, the left hand, and the 2 feet are talking to one another, the better off we are. Every email that I send out as a program director goes to my entire program leadership team. Why? Some of the emails, I'm like, I'm going to inundate your inbox. Some of the stuff you don't need, just delete it. When you see a Davis email, just delete it if it doesn't apply to you. But I want you to know what's happening. I want you to know what I'm telling the residents about SAEM. I want you to know what we're telling the incoming interns regarding the start of the year. Everyone is on the same page. Shared information. Information is so incredibly powerful, but the initial impulse, my initial impulse is like, I don't want to include other people because I'm afraid someone else will reply. And I don't want to undermine my message. It's actually quite the converse. Include, share, and people really feel on the same page. Beware autocorrect, I can tell you, and also beware of abbreviations. Now, I'm going to show you an actual photo from an exchange between my wife and her boss. My wife, are you available to meet? WTF, when she didn't hear back in a few minutes. Now, my daughter will tell you that my wife's not too hip. I mean, I think she's quite hip, but my 11-year-old daughter is like, Mommy, why did you say WTF to your boss? My wife's like, well, I didn't hear back. I was asking Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. I was trying to provide some options. So my daughter quickly instructed Mommy that WTF in today's abbreviated world has very different meanings. So fortunately, my wife is still gainfully employed. But email that or a text message that went out. Beware abbreviations. So actively manage change. None of us are great with change. Or I shouldn't say that. I'm not good with change. And I think that more people are hesitant to change than not. And change can be tough on organizations. It can be tough on people. And things you wouldn't even think about. We changed from the CCU to the MICU rotation during first year. A tough change at first. Why are we doing this? Is there some ulterior motive? Is something else going on that we don't know about? Always anticipate that change is going to at least incite a little bit of anxiety. So you want to actively manage the process. A perfect example of getting buy-in, speaking to stakeholders. One thing that I personally learned over time, and I can tell you I didn't do this at the beginning, you have to speak with your chief residents about all decisions that are going to impact the residents first and say, this is something that we're thinking about as the program management team. What do you think about this as a leader within the program? How would you feel if you were the intern that was the beneficiary of this change that we're going to make? And many of the changes that we internally struggled with as a program management team, our chiefs would be like, yeah, no big deal. And other ones that we thought would be no big deal whatsoever, they're like, this is going to be a big problem. You got to think about this, and we got to talk about this more. And use that intel before just sending that email. Because if you just send the email, it's going to piss people off. And that's what you want to avoid. So never underestimate the impact of change on individuals, the collateral impacts. The heads-up method is huge. Learning to listen. I shared at the beginning that I have what I humbly like to refer to as exercise-controlled ADHD. If I don't exercise every day, I'm really bouncing off the wall. Listening can be tough. Those of us that are in emergency care and work with emergency physicians, obviously we have a shared mindset. We like to take care of things. We like to be efficient, effective in what we do. But leadership is not about just hitting those check boxes and crossing things off a list. It really is about listening, gathering intel, reflecting, and deciding. Same principle with E, communications that we referred to before, resist the urge to hyper-reply. There's very few emails, literally, that need a response within 2 hours. Most emails can wait till the next morning. Not to undermine the importance, you want to be responsive. But if it's going to be that inflammatory email that could potentially cause trouble, wait until the next morning, sleep on it. And also avoid getting cornered into snap decisions. This is something that I learned very, very quickly. Whenever I'd see the sharks kind of swirling when I went to conference, I knew that there was something going on. I'd see the third years, and then the second years, and then the interns all kind of looking at me and then kind of swirling it a little bit closer. Swirling, and all of a sudden you get cornered. And man, when you get cornered, it's tough. What do you want to do when you're a person that doesn't like confrontation? You want to get out of that corner as quickly as possible, as seamlessly as possible. So the easy answer is yes, whatever you need, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Not the right answer. The right answer is to listen, be responsive, and then have something that you exercise in advance as your response. My response is always great points, important, give me a few days, and I promise I'll get back to you within 72 hours with a reply on this. Practice it in advance. Because if you don't practice it in advance, you get cornered into that snap decision in the heat of the moment. It's a very, very difficult thing to navigate your way through. And it happens all the time in all of our offices. So learning to listen when we have the attention span of gnats. Now, one of the most important lessons that I had was from my first chair, Dr. Mark Smith, at our shop. And when I first took over as program director, he said, gave me a whole list of things that he wanted me to focus on. In the last item of the list, he's like, oh, by the way, beware the holidays. I'm like, whoa, maybe I should come back in the office and sit down and hear about this. What do you mean, beware the holidays? He's like, listen, I've been in ED leadership for 30 years. And weird stuff happens in November, December, and January. He's like, trust me. And sure enough, weird stuff happens November, December, and January. Why? You look at the academic year, starts in July, ends in June. You look at the fiscal year, starts in July, ends in June. The midpoint of the year. If you live in the Eastern Seaboard, it gets pretty dark. It gets pretty cold. It gets pretty snowy. It's a tough time of year emotionally for most people that are at work. It's hard. And so things come up that might not come up otherwise. Short days, bad weather, the glimmer of start from July where everyone's so enthusiastic, new interns arriving. We just marched out the senior residents. That's gone. And then you think, well, the end of the year, that can't be that far away. It's a long way when you're staring at December 28th and looking at June 30th. It is the nadir of the year. It's a tough point. Never underestimate that. So it requires additional sensitivity, and I think the important message and the important lesson is that unless you absolutely have to, because it makes so much sense when you look at the calendar to make changes on January 1st, might not be the best time. Usually November 1st or March 1st are a lot better because it kind of gets you through that really, really tough time. So I think it's an important time for all of us to look at and be extra sensitive, extra cautious in things that we're doing, especially when enacting change. Emotional tags. I can tell you, the pit in the stomach. Our residents gather around. They're swirling at conference. It's happened several times. Probably happens about once a year. Dr. Davis, we'd like to talk about the number of hours that we're working clinically. Ooh, emotional tag, visceral response. What do you mean? You want to talk. Well, we've been reviewing the cord listservs, and we see that the norms are this, and we are here. My initial gut response is like, we review this every year, and we know that we're right on the mark. We don't work more, we don't work less, we're right in the center. Not the best response. Listen to what people have to say. And great ideas have come from this. One of the ideas that came from stepping back from that emotional tag, our residents a couple of years ago said, you know, it's hard when we don't get any days off. If we call in sick for a shift, we have to make up that shift. So that means that we're kind of like incentivized to show up sick to our shifts. Can't be great for our patients. It's certainly not good for us if we're nauseous, vomiting, have a high fever, but we don't want to have to make up a shift elsewhere, which crams another shift into an already busy month. That's really hard. And they're like, there's got to be a better way that we can do this. And so we actually looked at it as a program management team, and we came up with the wellness shift credit. Once a year, one shift, you get a get out of jail free card. And that means at any time during the year, everyone gets one. But if you miss a shift for an approved reason, you call in advance, call the chiefs, you go through the pathways and portals that you're supposed to, you can cash in that chip and not have to make up that shift. Or you can actually use it prospectively. If you know that you have to go to the DMV on a certain day, 3 months from now, and you're really worried about your schedule and how scheduling forces are and trying to schedule all these residents and run the department, you can cash in your chip prospectively as well. Use it retrospectively, use it prospectively. Huge win, right? One shift, not a big deal from a efficacy of training perspective, but really made a big deal and a big impact on people's lives. And it came from stepping away from that tag and actually listening to what our group had to say. Really, really great ideas. So don't just react. Take a step back, analyze, come up with a sound rationale. Reasonable, transparent, and consistent in everything that we do. That's the most important thing that we can do as leaders. Be reasonable. Communicate your rationale. Others might not like the decision, but at least if you talk about it, it's the same concept of always have the conversation. Be transparent, sound policies and procedures that are apparent to everyone, and then consistent. One of the key messages that I often find we give, as a leadership team, is that you do only for X as you can do for the entire group. And I can't offer this to you because I'd have to offer this to 29 other people as well, and we just can't do that. So this is when I started as program director after a couple of years. The years have shown their effects. Finally, fostering resiliency. The healthier the leader, the sturdier the oars, the sturdier the oars, the stronger the ship. The healthy leader, practice what you preach. Be the boss that you would want to have. So a bonus, Pearl, is that be the employee that you would want to have as well. Being a leader is a lonely place at times. Remember that the boss is never too busy for you. Always feel free, knock on doors. People really, really value and enjoy that. So rounding it out with some conclusions, the well-balanced leader, IQ, VQ, and EQ. And I'll be the first to admit, Mike Epter is not sitting here, my dear friend, but I'm telling you, I got up this morning, I went for a walk. Why? Because that's my happy place. I needed a walk, and I find that if I can invest an hour in doing some type of exercise, it helps me get through the day actually more effectively, more efficiently than I would otherwise. And then EQ is something that we can all sharpen. It leads to that leadership triad. Of course, we want to avoid the GQ. No place for GQ in there. So back to our top 10, support those whom you empower, embrace the difficult conversation, place yourself in others' shoes, treachery of e-communications, actively manage change, learn to listen, beware the holidays, step back from those tags, be reasonable, transparent, and consistent, foster resiliency among your group. Set the example. So we hit our goals, and I'll go ahead and conclude there. Thank you very much.